see how much time until Zoom kicks us off. Um, cool, buddy. All right. So, not that we should skip Easter at all, but I guess it's still all about Jesus. But I should have probably looked over my notes. I wasn't even um okay, so I have to wrap my head around. Okay, so this was the week 2 weeks ago. Matthew 14, Mark 6, John 5 to 6. And this was walking on water, feeding the 5,000. Trying to think what. Hey, if you need help, can you ask Daddy to help you instead of screaming? Okay, so I'm just going to go through. Like I said, I'm totally not even my brain isn't wrapped around this. Okay, so just going through, not grammatical, the order of the Bible verses. So starting in Matthew 14, um, it talks about all the background with John the Baptist, and he's been arrested, which we knew, and this is when he gets beheaded because he was calling out the leaders for their immorality, for marrying their brother's wives, and the wife didn't take very kindly to him, and so he ends up getting beheaded, and that trickles down to Jesus. His apostles return, or disciples come and tell him. And what I liked, and just something not to guilt you ever into serving or not mourning and taking your time, but it says, when Jesus had heard this, he withdrew from them in a boat to a desolate place by himself. And when the crowds had heard it, they followed him from their towns. And then he saw a crowd, had compassion on them, and then he healed their sicknesses. And I'm just thinking about, John the Baptist was like his brother in this, fight to build the kingdom. It was like someone he could go to be like, you know what's happening, because they've been prophets and outsiders and baptizing and just going around, and then to think he lost that partner in this, and he just needed to go away and be sad. And I love that even he knew that, but the people still came to him and he said he still had compassion on them and healed them of their sickness. And so, not saying to disregard your emotional needs, but I just loved seeing that very selfless example of Christ where, yeah, he was probably heartbroken and devastated. It was family and his cousin and just how sad he was, but still took the time to serve and heal, eternal perspective. And I just really, like I said, I'm always looking for his patterns of service and his patterns of righteousness in his life. Uh, so then going down, this is the crowd that's still there when they need to feed them. And I think, was that in Mark? I think it was in all three stories, actually, that they talk about him multiplying the loaves and fishes. What I love is that the apostles were kind of sassy when he says, oh, it's time to feed the crowds. And he's like, okay, we'll give them something to eat. Because he had said, they need to go into the towns. And I think it was in Mark's when he says, well, we would need about 200. In my Bible, it says denarii to feed them. And that's 200 days worth of wage. And so they're like, okay, Jesus, we'll just go and, buy the food with them with our, 2/3 of a year's worth or a third of a year's worth. No, yeah, 2/3 of a year's worth of salary. Okay, we're just made of money. We'll go do that. And I just kind of love the thought of them just kind of being sassy at him, which I know isn't always a good example, but I still love it. And in John, I love when reading the different accounts, the details that are included. And with this one in John 6, it says it was, when they went to see what food that they did have, it was a young boy that provided the loaves and fishes. And that was always something that stuck out to me learning the story. You don't have to be a grown up to contribute. You don't have to be, in an important calling or established or rich or, whatever it is. A young person can have this effect and provide a miracle. And it all came out of, the meager loaves and fishes that he had. And I love too that it was always pointed out to me that the boy could have easily kept that in his basket and been like, this isn't enough. Like, this is silly. Like, why would I even contribute this? This is barely enough to feed like me, maybe my family. How is this going to feed all these people? And he could have kept that and hidden that or, not shared it. But instead, he gave it to the apostles. Like, this is my offering. This is what I have. And then we know, obviously Christ can magnify that. And then just the application for us of not withholding, something that we think this isn't going to matter. This isn't going to make a difference. It's barely anything that I can contribute. And you never know. And then some of the things in Matthew, I guess like the words that they used when they gave the loaves and fishes to Christ, is that he looked up to heaven and blessed it, which I just think is a good practice. Like, yeah, it was pretty much nothing in comparison to the 5,000 men plus women and children. But he still was thankful, still asking, for the Lord's help, which is fun to think of Christ asking for the Lord's help. And then says that he took it and broke it. Where does it say? I was going to read it. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And thinking, with our sacrament bread, any of the times I think of hearing broken spirit or the broken heart and contrite spirit, it's a humble experience, like a humbling moment. It's being torn. And then the apostles were the ones who carried it out, which I just think is really cool, like foreshadowing and symbolism, that they had organized them and been like, okay, Peter, you're in charge of these companies. John, you're in charge of these companies, and there was just organization. And I love to see that even in our church structure nowadays, having that organization throughout. But then the apostles were the ones to carry forth this blessing. So it's not always just Christ, it's not always like, it's even the workers, us down in the trenches. And then obviously everything was magnified when it was brought to Christ. And I love that it says, and then they all ate and were satisfied. And then there were the 12 baskets full of broken pieces left over. And like so many things just from that story I love, of just the symbolism and everything that we can get, if we invite Christ into our lives, if we humbly bring our offering to him. In Mark's account, I kind of said it, but it says that Christ is even relying on God to multiply the fish and bread. So even he had to have faith and trust. And that they were, in this desolate place, far from towns. Everyone had come to him on this desolate place he tried to withdraw to, which is, kind of an allusion to the children of Israel being provided for also out in, the wilderness and not having anything and not having access. And I think that's later. Okay, that's not about this bread. Too many bread things. I'm trying to remember. All right. So super cool story. I love it. And I wonder if the people even realized, or if they were just like, oh, cool, the apostles have food, or if they knew this was 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and oh my gosh, we're all full, and oh, this is amazing. I just think it's awesome. So then he tells the apostles to go back across the sea. He goes to withdraw again, which I just love, always finding him like trying to carve out these moments for him to have peace, to commune, to pray, hopefully in this moment to mourn. And so they had gone out, and it said at about, what did they say, the fourth watch, which is about between 3 and 6 a.m. And it said the apostles would have been fighting the storm for about 9 hours. And because of the location of the Sea of Galilee, that it's low and the winds can just come in and just stir up crazy waves and storm and just, it's terrifying. And they're probably 3 miles into the middle of this sea. So almost smack dab in the middle, not quite to the other side. Um, and Christ notices. And that's what I think I loved. I'm trying to see if I can find. Christ sees it from his place where he had retreated to, is that he notices the storm and he notices their need. I'm sure they were calling out. I'm sure they were praying. And so I just love thinking of Christ kind of always looking out for us and seeing like, oh no, she's in a tough spot. Like, let's see what happens. And so it says in Mark's rendition that, when he walks out, he wasn't even walking towards the ship. And I have to find it because I have to make sure I'm like recounting this correctly, not changing scripture. That he had just intended to pass by. 6:48. So immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go to the other side and dismiss the crowd. He'd taken leave. He went into the mountain. The evening came. He saw they were making headway against the wind. Fourth watch. And he came to them walking on the sea and meant to pass them by. But when they saw him walking and they thought he was a ghost, and they cried out and they were terrified. So just trying to think, like, why would he just walk past them? If they're struggling for hours and hours, they're exhausted, they're in this little boat trying to get to the other side. And I had read a commentary that said that he was just trying to remind them, like, do you remember I calmed the storm before? Like, look, I have power over this. I'm walking on water in this storm. Like, I can take care of this. Like, I just beat the laws of nature with bread and fish. Like, I have power. Like, I'm here. Like, have faith. Don't freak out and be afraid. And so it was just interesting to think, like, he wasn't walking out there necessarily to run right to the ship and immediately pull them out, which I also think is just telling of our situation. Even if we're crying out, even if we're struggling for hours and hours, months, years, whatever, Christ can be there, but not necessarily to come and just immediately pull you from the boat or calm the storm. He might just say, look, I'm right here with you. Like, I'm doing this. Like, I will take care of this. I've got this. I've got power over this, but I'm here with you. And so once they're afraid and, don't recognize that it's him, one of my things I love every time he says, be not afraid, which I always think is such a funny thing. Like, we think we're going to die and you're telling me not to fear. But when he says, Jesus immediately spoke to them and said, do not be afraid. It is I. And that's the translation to the Old Testament name of, the great I am. Like, I am what I am. I am the great I am. And that is one of my favorite names of Christ, because it's been kind of shown to me that it's almost like a fill in the blank. Like, Christ is the great I am, fill in the blank. Like, what do you need? I am peace. I am strength. I am whatever it is you need. And so for him to call out and say, I am peace. I am comfort. I am, whatever you need me to calm the storm, I'm here. Don't be afraid. And I love just the open-endedness of that. Like, whatever you need Christ to be, that's what he is. And then I thought it was interesting that only in Matthew's account was Peter's walking on water. In Mark, who wrote for Peter, even he didn't include that part of the story. And I'm like intrigued, and I have no profound thoughts on why, except that, maybe he's a little ashamed and was like, we can just skip that part of the story. But I thought it was interesting that Matthew included Peter, because I feel like that's such an incredible moment. Why wouldn't you talk about that? And so when he says, if it's you, call me to you and I'll come. And I love that he's showing that faith and trust, in this who they thought was a ghost or, whatever. And so he steps out of this tiny little boat, trapped in the middle of this sea and the storm, and, what little safety he has, what little comfort this boat can provide. And, the normal, why would you leave the boat in the middle of the storm? And he goes towards Christ, which I think is just such a beautiful thing. Like, we need to leave the safety and comfort. We need to leave the normal structured, worlds that we live in. And if he's calling us to walk out into the storm, to walk out into the craziness that's happening, then that is exactly what we need to do. And then we all know that immediately when Simon Peter is distracted, it says, and he looked when he saw the winds, he was afraid again, and then began to sink. And I've always kind of thought, because they said, he took his eyes off of Christ and he lost his focus and he was distracted. But I also wonder, like, it wasn't just he looked at the winds and then he started to sink, but it was he looked at the winds and started to fear. And that was one of the two things Christ had said was, don't be afraid. I'm here. Like, it's me. And so I wonder if it was also just coupled with that fear. If he had seen the winds and been like, "Whew, this is crazy. I'm walking to Jesus. I'm okay." If it still would have been fine, because I don't think there's any way for us to. Oh, thank you. Can you go cast spells over there? Go show Daddy the wand you found. There's no way for us to put our heads in the sand and be like, I'm only going to focus on Jesus. Nothing bad is happening. Like, that's just not realistic. But I think it's when we notice all of the things happening, all the turmoil and the storms and the winds and all the craziness. And then we lose our faith and we become distracted and we fear, which is the opposite of what Christ is saying. Pop-ups. So, just a thought of Haley that I've wondered. And like I said, having only that account of Peter trying to walk on the water to him. Let me see if I have anything else. All right. So, and then also when he starts to sink and he cries out to him, "Save me." And I always love whenever, I don't know too much. I feel like most of the time in the ESV to the King James, they both have that same word, but it's always, and immediately Jesus healed the girl. And immediately, he pulls Peter out of the water. And I just love that it's that instantaneous. Like, Christ is there. He's waiting. His hand is outstretched. He immediately pulls him up. Trying to think. Oh, there's just so much good stuff. Okay, so things in Mark that weren't also in Matthew. One of the scriptures I really liked and kind of made me think of all those silly YouTube videos that you stumble upon. But there was one, it's literally, and they've said it before, but having like things repeated, sometimes it hits me different. But in 6:34, where is it? This is after, like, before he had done the 5,000 and fed them. But the great crowd had come, and he had compassion on them. And he says, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And I know that, like I said, they've said this before multiple times, I'm pretty sure. And I started thinking, like, what would those sheep look like? Obviously, I'm not a shepherd. I have no idea. But I know I've seen those YouTube videos where they're like, oh, this shepherd got lost and it's been up in the mountains by itself for years. And just how mangy they look, how have they eaten and survived? But also, like, all that wool that is just, they shear it off and it's always like this huge, gigantic ball because it's just so overgrown and like they need to be tended to and taken care of. And then when you watch, the farmers that finally find it, or the shepherds that finally find them, and then they shear off that wool, and just how like they pop right up and they're like, oh my gosh, I can walk again, like I can move. And even just from that silly video thinking, us getting lost and being away and not taking care of our needs and not having Christ take care of our needs, we're also weighed down, with stresses, sins, whatever it is, and lost. And, it's a miracle that the sheep survived, out on its own without any one to take care of it, to protect it. And so thinking that that's what he saw in these, thousands and thousands of people, were just all of these lost, weighed down, haven't been cared for, have been neglected, and, spiritually malnourished, and just all these things. And I just loved kind of this time seeing that and having that thought, like, oh, what a beautiful, like, parallel to kind of say how Christ could see these people. And then same thing, he feeds the crowd, calms the storm. And then I had seen it, so when he leaves, they get to a different place than they had intended, just because the storm had pushed their boat the wrong direction, which I think is kind of fun, because I don't think it was the wrong direction. And so I'm a very like, but that's not the plan. Like, why did we go this way when it said to go this way? And they ended up right where they needed to be. And so when they got out of the boat, people recognized him, ran to bring all their sick people to him. And it said they laid all their sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might even just touch the fringe of his garment. And then as they had touched, he was well. And I was thinking, like, we know a couple weeks ago, studying the woman who just touches his edge of his garment as he passes by, and she was healed. And now you've got whole groups of people saying, just let us touch just even that much of Christ. Like, we don't need, his hands on our head or, anointing or any, like, just let us get that close to just touch the fringe. And I'm thinking of sometimes, for people in their situations in lives, that might be all the coming to Christ that they can do, is to get close enough to touch the fringe of his garment. They may not be fully in a place where they can open their doors and welcome him in and spend all day every day with him and have him be that much of a part of their lives. That may be all they can do, is get just close enough to just touch the fringe and have some of that healing. But also that they still came to him. They still made the effort, the steps to get towards him, to get close enough to touch the fringes. And it's so small of an act, but like, there's just still so much power and weight to that. And I just really kind of loved it, just being like, just let us touch the fringe. Just that's as close as we need to get, and we know we'll be healed. And I think that's so true also in life. I mean, obviously, come into the fullness would be so much better, but we'll take that close, baby steps will get you there. I'm trying to see what in John. There's been a couple things. I love, and I know, Kelsey, you said you've been watching The Chosen. I don't know if you've gotten to the episode where in John 5, it talks about the pool of, I think it's the pool of Bethesda. Or maybe I'm confusing it with the town they were supposed to go on the boat to. But when he heals the man that had been there, I think it's like 40 years or something crazy. Yeah, Bethesda. It's such a beautiful, powerful episode. So if you haven't gotten there, look forward to it. And just a couple things from his story is that he's at this pool that supposedly an angel makes the water bubble. The first person that goes and touches the area of the pool that's being stirred up is supposed to be healed. Kind of superstitious, doesn't really work. You are in a place, at this pool with people who are helpless and just kind of at the end of trying, they just, what else can I do? But sure, I'm going to go and try, because what's going to happen? And what I love is this man had been there, it says 38 years, and Christ came to him there in this silly, superstitious place that was not going to heal him. He said, I can't even get to the water first. No one can carry me. I'm not fast enough. I'm never going to be healed. Like, what else can I do? But Christ came to that silly, superstitious place. He met him, and that's what I love. And don't miss this. They say all the time, they met him where he was. And then he's able to heal him so simply, so quickly, and then he leaves. And then Christ sees him again. It says in verse 14 at the temple. And that, I don't know how much time had passed, but for that to be one of the first things that this man does, once he's healed and able to go to the temple, to pray, to offer sacrifice, to just be there. Because I'm sure it's been decades. If he's at the pool for 38 years, how long before he got to the pool? When was the last time he'd been able to go worship? And so I just love that he met him at the temple. And like I said, just a beautiful, beautiful story. And then this was a fun thing that stood out to me just because it was the week before conference that we were studying this. But in chapter 6, when he says, this will be my last thought because I'm going to get cut off. But when they said, Christ is just talking about to the people all the signs, all the things that he's done. And Jesus answered them in verse 29 and says, this is the work of God, that you believe in him who he has sent. Which they know they're talking about Christ, which a lot of people didn't listen to. But then I was thinking of, we're about to listen to General Conference and those that he has sent. So that's our work. We're supposed to be listening to the people that God has sent and believe them with their messages. So before I get cut off, I had one more thought, but that's okay. Thank you so much for coming and listening. I hope you got your kids bathed. And we will be back next week. I don't get a 1-minute countdown. I just get a less than a minute countdown. So I will say bye before I get cut off. But thank you. Love you. Always for coming and supporting. I appreciate it.